so then you have no problems.
I have no problem.
You know what, I think you charge,
Mr. Rick, how we doing?
Hello,
yeah.
how's it going, Councilman? How was your, I guess you've had a meeting under your belt now,
And I
haven't you?
said, you know, can I?
Headache.
have these?
That's about all.
And they said, "Yes, consider it
That's about all I'm allowed to
medicine,"
say.
so that's good.
I hear you. I hear you.
So the font is old, I'm not sure how old.
Hats off for you.
This, thank you, just talks about we adopt a reference, the county doesn't.
Keep it between the ditches. That's the main thing. Stick to the rules and keep it between the ditches.
I have them, I'm picking them up in Raleigh.
That's their show.
2012, but they don't do them
Councilman,
every year.
How you doing,
I'm
sir?
doing all right.
Good.
How'd you get up there?
I just sat down.
He's used to sitting over
Wink,
here.
wink,
Wink means.
the
get
one
out of
thing
here.
that's in the statutes,
I'm 19.
that planning boards and governing boards cannot have any common members or anything like that.
Oh, I got you. I just sat down.
I hear you. Well, you're gonna see me really by the book on everybody. Because my job is to keep you out of trouble while you're doing what you're doing, okay? You don't wanna go through this and spend any money on it and then have some Tom, he's laughing because he knows what I'm talking about. It's not our Tom, but another Tom, an attorney, who will come in and he'll flip the script on you because of a procedural thing.
You know what popped in my head at 2 AM? Gary.
Really?
Remember that?
Gary Fankhauser or the other Gary?
The other Gary and Andrew.
How did that pop in your head at 2 o'clock in the morning?
I remember.
That's when you get up and you read a magazine or something, read a book,
Martha, how are you?
get that out of your head.
I was sitting there, you know, for whatever reason, I was thinking about what's gonna go happen here. And then boom, Gary popped into my head.
Oh, my
and a
God.
picture of him popped into my head.
Am I supposed to?
Yeah, he was
Is
a
that-
trouble.
It doesn't matter.
Trouble.
I
He was a
just bring my
pistol.
crap.
Yeah.
Oh.
How you doing? Good, how are you? All right.
Is it yours?
Hey,
I'm glad you-
I need to run the ladies' one. I will not.
Where's your coat?
Oh, I don't ever get called.
Hi,
How you doing?
good, how are you?
Awesome.
Where's the new puppy?
Oh, I had to bring him home. So his attention's kind of so short.
Sorry, getting specs out.
Okay, so this is what I want.
I used to have to wear glasses, I didn't have to wear glasses at all until I was 25, I had to start wearing them to drive. And I used to, and I said, man, so for 20 years, probably 15, 20 years, man, I wish it was out of the way. I wish I had put them on to read, I didn't have to put them on to be outside having fun. About 5 years later, I was in putting my glasses, I thought I needed my prescription changed. I go into the doctor,
Evaluation of
and
property.
he's flipping that thing around on my arm. He said, you don't need one. He said, your eyes are perfect. I said, really? He said, it's fairly common. I was nearsighted, so I had to wear them to drive. And now, I don't have to, I can read street signs a mile away.
That's great.
I don't know how that happened, but I have to put on something to read, you know. I'd rather put them on to read any day. Yeah, man.
And this is on YouTube, right? Because Liz was looking for it.
It's live right now, and once I end the live video, I have to go in and.
Trying to get in this campground over here a little while.
She can't watch it.
She can.
Is that what it's called?
She just
Well,
has to
it's called, I
subscribe
forget.
on her new one. But once we
Big
get her
Marks.
meeting, she won't be able
Yeah,
to watch it
Mike
again until
Nelson.
tomorrow
That
morning.
place right there. Man, I like never figured out how to get in there.
Yeah.
Coming in off the street over here.
Oh, yeah.
I saw where they got, used to have a bridge out one ninety-four.
You can hear us, okay, so we are,
And I was looking at it.
what's your question?
I wouldn't want to stay up here, but man, sometimes I'll come up
Today,
here.
Like this has
at
happened.
one time,
You got any others?
remember?
I saw that canola, but it's like 5 miles out of town.
It's close, that's the only one close by.
This the only one close by.
How you doing?
And this hasn't, oh, here wasn't too bad.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, okay.
Honey,
Especially
how
just
are
for a
you?
couple of days. That time.
There's a whole line coming out.
Did you watch that Clemson, North Carolina basketball game the other day?
Life is good.
Man, that was a good game, wasn't it?
Life is good.
I thought we had a chance to hang in there with y'all though.
Oh, you're a Clemson fan?
Not only am I a Clemson.
Did you go to Clemson?
I did.
Oh, my
I'm
mom and
sorry.
dad met at Carolina, the son went to Carolina, I went to Queens.
Well, see, I can't call it Carolina because my wife went
That's
to
South Carolina.
University of South Carolina.
That's the
She's
other
a Gamecock.
That's the other
I'm a
Carolina.
Buckeye, so let's just put
Just
that
settle it
out,
all,
let's
right?
just put that out of the open
Well,
there.
one of my guys at the office is a Buckeye.
Nice, that doesn't happen very often.
Yep. Yep, Ohio State. He did 2 years at Florida and 2 years at Ohio State. Graduate from
He was a
Ohio State.
Gator and then went to
He went
Ohio
from-
State?
Yeah,
It's
his,
not
well,
quite normal.
his father had moved to Ohio. His father was getting
You want me
sick,
to
so
put
he
you on
left
FaceTime?
college down there to go back with him.
Aw, bless his heart, that's
Spent
nice.
the last 2 years up there at Ohio State. Landscape architecture.
Nice.
He does a lot of our design work.
Okay.
I call him my big brother because he's about 3 months older than me.
Well, no, we can do it this way, I know you can watch it live. And if you have any questions, just yell at me and I will pick up the phone. Okay. Okay. Christy is with us by phone and she's watching the video.
Well, we're gonna Saturday, so. Fine. It's gonna continue on.
Shall we call the meeting to order?
I'm stepping it down.
6:02.
I stepped on a nail, or like a big, I don't even know what it was. It really wasn't officially nail. It wasn't a text. It was much bigger. It's almost like an industrial attack. And it was very rusty. And it went in pretty deep. So I had tetanus shot yesterday, and doctor and all that fun stuff. X-rays. Because I think they're still rusty in there. So, yeah.
You're fine.
I'm gonna move back there.
Keep running around in my purse, I don't fall asleep.
I ain't gonna fall asleep, buddy. You just drive in?
We need to approve the minutes.
Huh? You just drive
I
in?
didn't have a chance to do
Where?
it.
Johnson City?
I did apply to
I
work.
wanted to jump seat.
Oh, okay. I knew you were working there, so.
I work for Merrill Lynch,
Yeah.
but that's where I've done my training to get my licenses and
Oh,
my
okay.
certification.
I bet you're tired if you had to drive all that way.
No, I work from home.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, heck
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Has anybody had a chance to look at the minutes?
Yes, I have. Everything looked good.
Yeah, have you had a chance to look at all that list? Do I have a motion to approve?
I have a motion to approve the minutes from the January 11th meeting.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And the agenda, do we have any changes to the agenda?
Oh, we have, so how do we do now?
I'll take a picture. Of the agenda. pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, second.
I'll second.
All in favor? Ah, I think I should turn this meeting over to Rick now.
Thank you. You did not have minutes, I take it, from the previous meeting?
We approved them.
Oh, you did approve?
Yeah, we reversed them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is this, let me just ask you, Madam Chair, this is the way that the agenda appears in your rules of procedure. Is this a satisfactory
That's
format?
fine.
Okay, because this will be the way that it will basically run at every meeting.
Okay,
At least those first 5 things, then when you get to old business, then you get to new business, that stuff will change every time.
there's a quorum for us, it's 4, correct?
Yes. Okay. Did you seat the other 2 members, or you still just have 5 members?
We still have 5.
You still have 5, so a quorum is 3, since the other 2 seats are vacant. The 5 members are vacant that we talked about earlier, but I think we changed that, didn't we? Yeah, we moved that to 5. We moved that to 5. We started out saying we should have about 7 and 5, we bounced back and forth, and I just checked, and we did move that back to 5.
Yeah, under number 4, it says 7.
Yeah, it says 5 now, so 3 is a quorum. Well, it's good to be back. I got to get around town a little bit today. Did some exploring, checking things out. Exploring the town, not out in the mountains. So I wanna kind of start off with some very basic housekeeping items. Since this is our first meeting where we're gonna be diving into that, what I call the leapfrog approach to reviewing or introducing a series of articles, and then next month we'll review those same articles. And then we'll introduce new ones after we review the old ones, that sort of thing. So we'll kind of be doing this through the project. And by housekeeping, I mean some simplifications. You, for example, received a couple of new documents, a replacement document for your rules procedure and a replacement document for the Article 4, the board article that you had been given earlier. And just as a matter of keeping track of large volumes of documents, and especially as you see updates done, and you will throughout this project, you'll see updates. My recommendation is if you're replacing a page or you're replacing a whole article, I stick a little rip in mine so I don't have to wonder which one is the old one. And then you can keep it, or you can throw it in recycling or trash, or use it for mulch, or whatever you wanna do with it. But that's my suggestion, so that you don't get bogged down, because you will find that before this is over, you may have articles with 3 or 4 different pages in them that have different watermark dates where we changed something or modified something or updated something, okay? So it will be a little bit of a document management exercise, and so that's just always been my tip. You can still read it that way, but at least you don't confuse it. Then you can keep it or you can discard it. I'm going to keep mine for just a moment while I point out that the new rules of procedure that you received today, the change in those was just from Board of Aldermen to council. We had both names floating around out there, and we wanted to do some drilling to make sure we got the technically correct term for them. Excuse me, it says Board of Aldermen instead of council, okay? Sometimes they'll call yourselves a council as a nickname, but you technically in your charter are a Board of Aldermen, Okay, so that's the only change that you'll see to the rules of procedure. And it's one of the two changes you'll see to the Article 4, where they appoint you, where the town board of aldermen appoints you. We also changed in there the size of the planning board from 7 down to 5, as I mentioned earlier. So that was the changes and the reason for the new draft. You'll notice there's a new watermark. That new watermark actually has on it today's date. And that's the way we will track these. That's not the date that I made the change, that's the date that it gets redistributed, handed out, passed out, you will receive it, that sort of thing. So it makes it easy to keep track of what version was in what meeting and all of that in a few months when you're looking back at something to figure out if you have the old one or the correct one or the new one or not, okay? Just as a little bit of a matter of document management. So as I pointed out in our early discussions, this first grouping from your reading guide, this first grouping is really what I call the boring stuff. You're gonna have a couple of months of boring stuff, okay? And that boring stuff is while we're figuring the town out. We gotta keep going, get y'all moving on some things while we figure out some other things. So with that said, we're gonna start down, and you'll notice that there's 2 little check boxes on your little reading guide. That's so you can easily keep up with what you've got versus what you've reviewed. That's what I use my 2 check boxes for. So in the boring stuff, and forgive me, but I had a cold a couple weeks ago that took me a while to shake, and so I may have a cough or two in a little while. I've been tested for COVID several times, and I have checked my temperature every day since really about 2 days after Christmas. And I'm gonna make it. My doctor says it was walking pneumonia. And I don't know, it didn't make me feel like walking, that's for sure. It made me feel like laying down.
Rick, I just want to mention that we have one other board member who couldn't attend because she has a sick child, but she is watching on YouTube.
Okay.
And that's Christy Ray, so she was here last time, but she couldn't attend this time, just want to make sure you.
So now we
Okay.
have the others,
And-
and that's where.
But unless we go through the procedure, I don't think she can, vote.
No, she's not voting, she's just watching so she can keep up to speed.
Excellent, that's great that she's here. Hope you feel better, Christy. Take care.
Is part 1 going
There's
to
1,
1?
no 2.
I'm doing these.
3, and then 4
Um,
to replace.
Part 1 going to 1.
So is everybody,
I'm a little confused as to where all these go.
right, tab 1 will have Article 1.
Okay.
I'm not smart enough to
But
read
part
all
1.
of it.
Part 1 or Article 1?
All right, you're looking at the rules of procedure. The rules of procedure go in tab 27. You have a table of contents at the very front that will tell you those things. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Rules of procedure go in tab 27. You probably have your old one in there
And we can rip that.
that you can pop out and put a little rip in or keep it, your choice. The rip just makes it clear to me which one is no good.
I don't see.
I'm gonna give y'all a minute to get that sorted out here. And then we can do the articles, starting with Article 1, we can kind of get those in the notebooks as we reach each one. So we don't need to necessarily get them all out in front. So if I may, Madam Chair, members of the board, I would like to begin now with the introduction of Article 1. I'm gonna give, these introductions will be fairly general, and then, as you recall, your role will be to review over the next month, and then to read them at your leisure, and then we will review, discuss any changes, answer any questions, dig in as deep as you want to on the review section, which will be at the beginning of your February meeting, okay? Then we'll introduce new ones. So I try to keep my introductions very generalized, not digging in too deep, to give you kind of overview, not read it to you, not necessarily dig in as deep as I will on the review side. The Article 1 is quite simply this. Anytime you are crafting an ordinance, or basically an ordinance is the technical term for a local law. That's a law adopted by a city, town, or county. Okay, an incorporated jurisdiction in the state of North Carolina. And the first thing you have to actually do, believe it or not, before you just start writing standards or whatever you're gonna write, is you have to actually create that law. You have to ordain that ordinance. And so that's what this first one does, is it enacts. And if there's anything out there that it would be replacing, it also repeals those at that time. So you'll see as you go through these little topics, a lot of that. And because this ordinance will probably be hundreds of pages long, I bring the signatures for the mayor and the clerk to the front, so they're not buried away at the back of Article 23 or something like that. The effective date, right now, we're tentatively on track for aiming for the governing board to be taking action probably in October. It might be that they're not ready in October. Might be that you're not ready for them to have it by October. But that's the tentative schedule right now, so that's why it's in there. Now, the yellow is for me to point things out, just so that you are to point things out to myself, to remember to check things of that nature. There's nothing more than flags. The yellow is just a flag. Down the road, and as you'll see in Article 1, in those rules of procedure that we passed out earlier, because you've already seen them, light blue or blue is changes that I make. Green is garbage. If I've highlighted something in green, it means it's a word that I know has got to change. I don't know the answer to it yet. So green is garbage, blue is new, yellow is just a flag, and that's the colors that I will use throughout this process. So if it's something I really want us to talk about, I'll highlight it in yellow. I want us to make sure we stop, or I want to make sure you see it. I'll highlight it in yellow. If you told me to change that 5 back to a 6, it would show up next month as a blue 6. If I put something in there that I know is junk, it will be green, it will be garbage. So that article, Article 1, is the part that creates some things. It has to, by statute, reference a plan, you know, that thing that Tom's working on, that I'm gonna give you a little 2-second update on at the end of this. And so that's what you'll see on page 2. Jurisdiction, it defines the jurisdiction. What is the jurisdiction of the town? Under what authority is the town exercising and doing anything? What if there's a conflict? I'm just hitting sort of the headings right now. What if there's a conflict between this ordinance and something else that the town had enacted in the past, or that they enact in the future? What if it's a conflict between 2 components of this same document, the same Article 23 articles? What if it's a conflict with a covenant or a deed restriction in some, you know, resort or subdivision or property of some sort? Sometimes we see, I'm dealing with one at the coast right now, where the Roosevelt family donated a bunch of land, and the town has these deed restrictions on it. And yeah, Eleanor, yeah, that one. The effect on any agreements that might be out there, things that might have been an agreement between the town and another agency, a county government or something. It's just an example, okay? Severability. Severability means that if the courts are reviewing something in an ordinance, in your ordinance, or the courts have ruled that something is unconstitutional or illegal, and that sort of thing happens. We had the federal courts rule on something that we'll get into in Article 17 down the road on signage a number of years ago, and it invalidated everybody's sign stuff until they made some changes. And what this provision says is that that doesn't invalidate everything else. It only invalidates those things, okay? So it severs it, sort of slices, like taking a sharp knife and cutting it out. Then it goes into interpretation and rules of construction. That's a little bit about how to interpret or how to read. And so when you read this, you'll say, okay, this, and most of it makes sense, but if you don't say it, you can't just assume it, okay? Compliance, establishment of a map, zoning map, things of that nature. This is what creates those animals. Interpretation of boundaries. If it looks like the center line of the road on the map, guess what? It's the center line of the road. If it looks like the creek, it's the creek. If it looks like a property line, it's the property line. So there's no doubt about what somebody means. And then, my favorite, this is one of my little inventions. And I think, Bill, you were around when we had the eclipse, weren't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and this came in handy. This came in handy. I call it state of emergency. Because believe it or not, a lot of times there's chaos between agencies when there's a disaster. It could be flooding, it could be a tropical storm, it could be any number of things. And in 2017, we had a major solar event called solar lunar event called, where the moon got in the way of the sun, called the eclipse. And a town of about 1,400 people was on the center of it, on the center path. And the rumor mill was running rampant about everything under the sun coming to this town, because it was the only town in North Carolina that was gonna be on the center path. And I was timing airplanes when they were leaving the airport after it was over. They were leaving on about 50-second intervals. That's how busy this was. Had about, how many, 15, 20,000 people?
22,000.
22,000 people came to town, and I told the council, I said, we're gonna have people parking RVs in front yards, backyards, side yards, driveways, top houses and under houses. We're gonna have people selling paper cups that hold 2 quarts and bicentennial beards and everything else going on under the sun, cotton candy and whatever else you wanna call it, all over the place, and there's no way that we can get our arms around that. So I recommended that the council adopt a short-term state of emergency, because we're being inundated by non-local people, and basically suspend our temporary use rules. Temporary use meaning, you know, how long can you set up a cotton candy thing out in the front door of the church or whatever, for this period of time. So we're not ignoring our rules. You follow me? So it came in quite handy. And 24 hours later, you couldn't tell anything had happened.
No.
They were all gone.
It was
Poof.
amazing.
It stopped about as fast as it started. So that's a light side of it, but it can come in handy when you've got a reason. And FEMA is one of the biggest problems. You will have jurisdictions all the time saying, what do we do? FEMA's coming in here and they're taking over the town. What do we do? It's simple. And actually, we have an easy way out for the council. If the governor, the state declares a state of emergency, then we don't really have to duplicate that. We can just sort of say, aha, okay, we're okay. We're not gonna get over a barrel because of something that's going on with some electrical connection or whatever. And then typically our federal states of emergency are usually much more substantial, you know, acts of war, things of that nature. But that's all covered in here. So that's a little bit of an introduction to how I will introduce these. Now, I don't intend to go through every little subsection on every one at the introduction level, but I always like to start with Article 1 so that you get a little bit of a feel of how generally light and overarching I try to keep this. So when you do your reviews, it will probably make a lot of sense to you. Article 3, this is it is the longest article in the entire document. And because of that, we're gonna go through and read each page twice. Just kidding. I didn't get any smiles or chuckles on that until I said I was kidding. But it's definitions, okay? Definitions generally, unless, they don't really apply to an individual word unless that word might have multiple or either context sensitive, meaning in the context of what we're talking about types of definitions. Generally, it's definitions of phrases. I had one today where it was like a 3-word phrase that a question had been raised in a town, and it was right there in the definition section. There's the answer. So that way there's not any ambiguity between how different people might read a phrase or what have you. I can't remember exactly what that one was. Gross floor area, that was it. which is in the F's under floor area, gross and minimum. Also, you know, there's a couple of things that go with it, so sometimes you'll see definitions that way. So gross floor area is defined. The big question was whether, you know, whether garage space was included in that or not. Well, that spells that out. This makes it easy to determine, does it or does it not count, because it might affect, in their case, in that town, it affected the size, maximum size of accessory dwelling that they wanted to do behind the house. Okay, so that's just an example in that particular town's context and there. So all the definitions are there. Now, on back, and you'll get a table of contents that goes into each article as we get a little further down the road, which will, but before we get to the finish line, will make it easier to circle back and find things in the different articles. But it's hard for me to do that table of contents without much of it done yet, all right? So, the end of this Article 3, you'll find two more things besides definitions. The last one on page 48 is symbols. What is FT? It stands for foot. What is AC? It stands for acre. R/W stands for right of way. Sometimes those will appear in sketches. Follow me? It won't always be spelled out in words if it appears in a sketch. If you back up a couple pages to page 45, you'll see a couple of pages of abbreviations. We have a lot of abbreviations that may appear so that we don't eat up paper and space just saying the same word over and over and over again. If there's a reason to use an abbreviation. Like BMP, it's a stormwater term that the state and the federal government invented back in the, I guess, late 80s. It's the dumbest term I've ever seen for a thing. It's called best management practices, but it's not best management practices, it's a pond. So that's what the abbreviations are all about. So, and the things that are in green are garbage. They're just sitting there.
Why are you taking out the 181, C-181?
Well, I'm not taking it out until we know that's what we're gonna do.
Or have a better
If that's what we're gonna call it
There's
versus
a better
something else.
term.
If there's better, if there's whatever, it might be garbage orders right now till I get y'all's feedback on that. But I don't see you changing the name of NCDOT, that's why it's not green. You follow me? So, right, and so what that is for a character district, like along that corridor. And so we might end up with two, we might end up with a 181 and a 194. Does that make sense? For your like strip commercial on the way out of town type of areas. What I call the character of a corridor, because 181 might have a little different character to it than 194 as it goes through town. It might not, y'all, that's part of what you'll be discussing and talking about, things of that nature. You know, which one is sort of our gateway, which one is sort of our, you know, does a lot of heavy lifting for the town. You know, because everything kind of has its purpose, okay? So that's 3. Feel free to read 3 if you want to. Most of them are fairly standardized. There are some definitions in there that are included in state statute that we cannot change. Okay? So I'll point that out to you when we see that too. Article 4, which you had seen before when we sort of spilled the beans on that one when we were trying to get you up and running as a board. And this is the revised one, so it's got blue, which is the changes, where we corrected the council, the board of aldermen, and we changed the membership of the planning board from 7 to 5. So you'll see that appearing throughout that article for both the planning board and the board of adjustment, which may end up being the same group with 2 sets of hats and double the pay, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So that's how that works. Article 5, like I said, this is all the boring stuff. Article 5, amendments. Amendments are updates or changes. Once something is adopted, once a law or set of standards or something like that is officially enacted, changing it is not just somebody goes back in there and gets the book out and scratches out the old words and writes in some new words and that's it. The statutes require that it be a process, a public process. So it's obvious, it's visible, it's not in secret, it's not behind the scenes, okay? That's what this article is about. Okay, this article is about amendments. Now, and it spells out things like, let's say that 2 years from now, Bill finds where I misspelled a word. I left one of the M's out of commercial, or I put 161 instead of 181 somewhere, okay? A correction like that can be made without it going through that big process. That spells out the criteria for when it can be done by either the clerk or it can be done by the administrator of the ordinance, okay? It talks about who can initiate formal ones. This board can, the governing board can, a citizen can, okay? And how that goes, how you go through those processes. And I'm gonna touch on a couple things very quickly. In amending, there's really two areas that you can amend. One is the words. The words might apply to everybody in a given situation, or everybody that's, all the houses, or all the residential of a new development, or all of the commercial, or something like that when you're changing the text of the document, okay? When you're changing the map, it might apply only to specific properties. So we have a little bit more robust process for that, so that people in the area know what's going on. Because it might just affect an area, okay? And so I have a neighborhood meeting built into that. That neighborhood meeting is intended to help everybody. Because those are authorized by law, but they're not required unless you adopt it in your ordinance, and I highly recommend it. And here's why. Typically, if you were changing the map and it came to the planning board, the planning board's job is to look big picture at the future, what's best for the town in the long run, over the horizon, where we're headed. Will it get us there, or will it hold us back from getting there? And you make a recommendation to the governing board, the Board of Aldermen, the council, okay? If it's a contentious issue where there's lots of people that get worked up about it, not to you, because your vision, you're looking at the technical side. The council is gonna be looking at your recommendation, but they're also gonna be listening to those citizens. And usually, most citizens are not thinking about that horizon. They're mostly thinking about me, mine, my backyard. I like it, I don't like it, whatever that is about now. And if an issue goes straight from the planning board to them, and we invite these folks to come in, normally the first thing that they do is they show that they are upset. And to be upset, you're usually expressing emotion. When you're emotional, it's like oil and water. There is no such thing as a rational answer to an emotionally charged question. And what tends to happen is it puts the council in a bad situation where they're sitting up here and they're watching somebody that's on this side of the issue and somebody on this side of the issue barking back and forth, and they're just sitting there watching it like a ping pong game. So how do we fix that? We fix that by requiring an opportunity for whoever's proposing this change and whoever is concerned about this change to have their own meeting. It might be here in this council chamber. It might be in a church social hall, but somewhere where it's structured and somebody from the town is there to answer technical questions about the procedure or about any standards that might apply. But it lets them focus on that issue and get that emotion out of the room, because usually, from my experience, 30 to 45 minutes, all that's flushed out, and whether they agree or disagree, at least the emotions flushed out. And so now, after the neighborhood meeting's been held, when it does get to the governing board, it's something that can move along with a relatively rational thing. Doesn't make their decision any easier, it just cuts to the chase. Because they still have the tough decision to make. Do I look at the big picture, which is the planning board's recommendation? Or do I get bogged down in this dispute between these neighbors who, some like something, some don't like something, and they're all mad and everything else, and we get to decide. But they're the ones that ran for office, so that's their normal role, is to get in the middle of the fray, right? But that's how it works, and that's what the neighborhood meeting is about. So it is about giving that emotion a chance to run its course, where the only topic in the meeting is that. It's not taking up the rest of the agenda for that night. You follow? So they've worked really, really well at that. I've had people that were terrified because a lot of people will fear change. And then once they see, oh, this is actually gonna go quite well, that fear subsides. Or they may still not like the change, but at least they've had a chance to get the information that they wanna see, without having to make a spectacle out of it at the council meeting.
Teresa brought it to my attention about Sweetwater, and they're wanting to be annexed into the town, and.
One person. Yeah, Sweetwater is.
Sweetwater is, yeah, just one piece of property, and.
Is it a subdivision?
No.
No,
No, it's just, it's, an elk farm.
yeah, it's an old, it's actually 3 properties that were combined into one, but, and it's a satellite, it's about 7/10 of a mile outside of the nearest town limits.
How big is it?
55 acres.
How big is the town?
482.
Okay, 10% is the max limit unless you are excluded by a particular act, and we just have to check that special act to see if we're excluded.
I looked and I had town attorney look this morning, we're not.
You're not excluded yet. There's an act that excluded a lot of towns from, it's called a proportionality rule. It keeps the satellite from becoming bigger or too disproportionately bigger than the primary corporate limits. Now, if other properties between there, and it became contiguous, meaning it all touches, maybe my house is in between, and so I get convinced that it's good for me too, then it could be done. But if it's a certain size, it can't be. Brevard, City Manager Brevard asked me back in like 92 or so, 92. The Pisgah Inn wanted to sell mixed drinks. And they couldn't do it because it was dry county, and they wanted to come into the town limits.
I don't know if you hear why.
We found a different solution, but they wanted to annex into Brevard, and they were 22 miles as the crow flies away. We're like, no, because there's also proximity rules. You can't be but 3 miles from the primary corporate limits.
This is gonna be contentious.
So we did a special act that, where I live in Kannapolis, we did a special act for the Kannapolis Country Club, because it was Kannapolis was stuck in 2 counties, and each county had separate referendum situations. So there were those in Raleigh that thought, well, if this, then, or if that, then, but if both, then we can't. And so we had this special act that went through the local delegation in Raleigh, and we got, those privileges for the Kannapolis Country Club, and for the Charlotte Motor Speedway, and for the, Pisgah Inn. So, when there's a will, there's a way, I guess. But, whether you're for or against it, that's not my role. My role is the technical side. What's the right way to go about
So
it?
if it's a bigger piece of property than what would be allowed, can it be subdivided into 2 different properties and one remains out in the
No,
county?
it's the total area. In other words, let's say there were 50 different properties all around town, and they all wanted to come in for some reason.
If it's not attached.
Then
to the town
10% is the maximum that you can have that's not attached, whether it's one property or a bunch of properties. So if you had one over here for 12 acres, one over there for 3, and one over here for 15, you add them all, and you cannot exceed 10% of your primary corporate limits on that.
How big is Mountain Limb? How many acres is Mountain Limb?
But this is the article if they ever came in, and we would have to we'd have to go through and amend our maps and do all of that, and so this is what spells all that out, okay? So that sounds like something that we might be able to look at some options on. Because like I say, that sometimes, and there is an act out there, a special act that was done, and this got a long list of jurisdictions that were thrown into the mix. And it might be that we could get the local delegation to say, hey, we'd like to amend that act to throw Newland into that. We have a reason, because you're 400 acre.
459.88.
Okay. 640 acres is 1 square mile. So you're like barely over 2/3 of a square mile in size in land area. That's not very big. So they might say, yeah, sure. Because it's not uncommon for something to pop up that might be in the 50-acre range, you know? So might be worth something. I don't know what your relationship is with your local delegation, but it might be worth something to talk about. This is an even numbered year, so it's the short session in Raleigh. They generally, if it's a no-brainer, they might do it in 24, but otherwise it'll probably get sucked into the process for 25, the long session. Because they don't want to work much in 24 because they gotta get reelected. That's the way it works in North Carolina. Long session is the odd year, when they're not on the ballot. Now, then there's a special little tool at the end of this amendment stuff. It starts on page 9. It's a special tool in the toolbox. You may never use it. But remember that Sears toolbox I've got that I told you all about? This might be your Sears toolbox item that you just never used. But if you ever need it, it's sitting in there. And it will take me more time to take it out than it does to just let it sit there. So you might as well let the tool stay in the toolbox. Conditional. That means as part of the legislative process, and you're gonna be learning a lot about this over the next few months. Legislative is the act of making law. That happens at the governing board level, like adopting an ordinance or amending an ordinance. If they were to, say on that 50-acre project, let's just use that as an example, have some concerns. There were people that were raising some concerns. And you wanted to make sure that those concerns were addressed. In conditional zoning, if everybody agrees, like the people that are applying, that are making the request, and the board, the governing board, then you could put some conditions into it. Okay, that's that tool. It's a handy little
Well,
tool.
no water, no sewer would be one of them, they're not asking for that.
Correct. See, that might be an example of some conditions that they would waive off any requirements that the town provide any such service to them at any point in the future, or for 100 years, or whatever condition is the right condition. The nice thing about it, you literally write that condition in, and that condition becomes a component of that law. So it's clear. But you can't just impose it. The governing board can't say, well, we're gonna put this in there. No, they have to agree. It has to be done in writing, and the best way to do that is to pull a piece of paper out like the map that they're showing and have them put it on there right then, and it goes to clerk world. So we have that documentation that they agreed to that or consented to that in writing, if they don't have time to write something up and email it to you. If it happens on the spot in the meeting, somebody has this idea, and they say, yeah, we'll do that, we'll agree to that. So it's appearing in something more than just the minutes. It's not just words in the minutes, it's words in the minutes backed up by a document that they dated and signed. And they could do that by an ink pen, you know, most powerful piece of equipment on the planet. No bulldozer, no engineer can outdo this thing right here. So that's what conditional is. It is that if you're looking at a change and you're saying, well, we're worried about this. If we make this change, does this open up a can of worms? This is the lid to the can of worms. If you want to be able to make a change but keep the lid on the concern that somebody's raising, this is the little bit extra process, not much, but a little bit of extra process that we go through to do that. Put the lid on the can of worms. All right, so we are burning right down this list. The next one is the last one for this batch, this bundle. If you remember your reading guide, there's little lines that break up which ones are gonna be in here, 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6, are this month's introduction. Then we will have, as you will see on your agenda, there will be a review opportunity on those, which one review, like on fix something, definitions might last 1 second. If you say, well, we don't have any questions, we don't have any comments, boom, I just ask, do you have any about the next one? And we go through that, we can dig in, or we can move right along. It's not gonna be too late, because nothing is official till we get to the end of the project, so there'll be basically one vote at the end for you. And so we can, because sometimes it helps for you to keep working your way through, learn about this, learn about that, and then as we get closer to the end, it all starts to make sense. And you say, hey, I made a note back here a few months ago, and I want us to go back and visit that, because now I understand a little bit more about it, and I have a question. So, not to worry, when we move along, all we're doing is just moving along. We're not getting too far down the road that you can't, circle back at any point. So Article 6, and by the way, 5, let me mention this about 4 and 5, not much you can do about it. They're basically keeping with the state law. They're not repeating the state law, because the state law doesn't speak to the public. The state law speaks to towns. State law says, this is your authority town, and this is the things that you have to make sure of. So how do we do that? Speaking to our citizens, or speaking to the business community. This is the language that you see in here. So the 4 about, we can change the number of members or something like that, but we can't change how you get appointed, that kind of thing. In 5, on amendments, we can take a tool out, like a neighborhood meeting, or we can take a tool out like conditional. But we can't change the process. We can't say we're not gonna notify people, or something like that. No, there's a process that we are required to notify. We can kind of set up some parameters around that process, but we can't delete that process. Well, Article 6 is the same way. Article 6 deals with 2 things. Variances. A variance or variation might be when a standard, for some reason or another, makes total sense, except over there where the river bend is, and it's washed out up there, and the road turns just before you get to the bridge, and that property right over there, it's not gonna work. There are processes for how to vary and what the basis for that variance it is. So it's not just, oh, forget about the rule. No, we actually adopt something that validates what was done to vary that rule in that situation. And it goes into, and it gets recorded with the land and everything else. So down the road, if they're trying to get a mortgage or something like that, and the mortgage underwriter needs a verification from the town that something was properly done,
It's documented.
there's a document. If you don't have it, ever since the Dodd-Frank Act back in 2010, you can end up finding yourself not getting approved for a loan, or not getting underwriter writing on an insurance policy or something like that, because Dodd-Frank Act was all about mitigating risk in the financial industry. It was a headache when it happened, but now we see how it's actually affecting us, because we get so many requests now from banks and insurance companies to verify things when they're concerned about a building. Because think of it this way, if that building, let's say they had insurance on that building and it was valued at $250,000, and there was some damage to it that if it couldn't be repaired under the old code, and it couldn't meet the new code, and then they do some investigating and find out that it wasn't done properly to begin with, then the insurance company is gonna say, foul, we're not paying your claim. You follow me? So the things that we're doing actually protect property rights. Property rights are a balancing act between the property being affected and the people affected by that property. And I'm an advocate of balance in there. There's not a winner and a loser on either side. So some people will say, well, wait a minute, y'all are doing this stuff, that's gonna take away my property rights. Actually, it adds far more to it. It just also sets standards. Think of it this way, you bought an old house, 200-year-old house that was rewired in 1917, or wired for the first time in 1917, and you flip the light switch on, and it shoots sparks out of the chandelier because it hadn't been lived in 15 years. There was no standard when that was probably gone. Today, when somebody builds a house and somebody buys that house, they expect it to be to a standard. They expect it's called quiet enjoyment. If I buy something, if I buy a piece of land or I have a house built, I expect to have the quiet enjoyment of that property. And so what we're basically doing is making sure that when buyers buy something, that they're buying what they expect to be buying going forward on new things. So variances deal with being able to vary a standard based on factual criteria that warrants that variance, not good old boy stuff like, hey buddy, you know, you're on council now, I need a break, man, I need a break. Remember I gave you a bag of pecans. Or are they pecans here? I settled that argument a long time ago. My grandmother was a horticulturist, and she called them pecans. And I hear people call them pecans. I said, they're pecans. If you read the word, it says pecans. The second part of Article 6 is appeals. Let's suppose that Bill is explaining something about how something needs to be done, and somebody says that that's not the way they read the ordinance, or the way they read the standard, or the technical manual, or whatever they're looking at. That's the process for how their appeal gets heard. I have one coming up next week where I am on trial for my interpretation. Ordinance I wrote, but somebody wants to appeal it because they
don't agree with your
they don't agree with my interpretation, and they're not using rationale to do it. They're just disagreeing. Okay? A town put limits on a food truck because this food truck was setting up every day, same place, all the time, and to the point where other businesses were starting to complain. Because they were paying taxes, they were, had investments in their property and things of that nature. Here comes this food truck every day. We'll go home every day and come out there every day. And it's setting up. And so when the town adopted its new ordinance, they put some limits on the frequency. How many times a year at any given location can this food truck be there? The whole idea is that the food trucks are not permanent, they're temporary. And they want to keep them kind of that way. And this person's saying, well, I'm grandfathered in. And it doesn't work that way on temporary uses. It works that way on permanent things that are established, but when you left, it ended. When you came back, it started again on a temporary thing. Food truck literally leaves every day, it comes back. They literally drive it home from this spot and come back every day. And the town's very concerned about it. And my interpretation was it's temporary, and it has this many, 104 times a year is the limit in the ordinance for that town. Some towns are more, some towns are less. Some towns are more restrictive, some towns are not restrictive. That's not my call, that's the town's call. In that town, it's 104 times a year, which is essentially twice a week at any given location. Well, they go there every day. And they're appealing. So there's a process. And the Board of Adjustment, which is gonna sit there and hear the facts, is gonna have to decide, is that a valid appeal? We're not sure, the attorney called me on the way up here today, we're still not sure what they're appealing, other than they just don't like the fact that they are limited. They think they're grandfathered in, and you can't really do that on if they built a building, there it is, and we will protect that right forever. But if you tear it down and then wanna build it back, then you have to build it back to the new standard. You don't get to build it back. I can't go and start selling log cabins the old way, just because I used to do it. Okay, it's just like speed limits. Speed limits aren't grandfathered in. I can't say, well, you know, I used to come through Newland about 90 miles an hour back in the 50s, and they put up this sign that says 30 miles an hour. Well, I'm grandfathered in. I've been coming through Newland all this time. Doesn't work that way. When the rule changes, the rule changes, except when it comes to real property. Real property meaning land or a structure erected on that land, permanent structure erected on that land. Everything else goes with the new law, the new rule. If the speed limit changes, so be it. Speed limit changes. I now have to drive slower. Follow me? So that's the real case. It's coming next week. And so this is the process. The attorney's not sure what they're asking. I said, well, I can tell you what they're asking. They just want somebody to let them off the hook. You know, that's all they really want. They don't care about the rules. They don't care about the process of the rules. But at least the town now has a legitimate way to address the issue. So that is how we will leapfrog through these articles. Now, next month, when I'm here, these same articles will be at the beginning under a section called review. It'll say, like where it says on your agenda now, number 1, Newland Development Ordinance, NDO, introduction of draft articles. Well, that introduction will bump down, and review will be first, review of these articles that you just received. And then there'll be introduction of this next little group of 7, 14, 22, and 23. All of which are pretty short, much less material. Any questions of me? This is the warm-up period. This month, maybe next month, we're still warming up. Then it'll become second nature for you.
I wrote some questions down from 2 of these that we took out.
Keep them in format. Anything you want to do. I do have one more matter in the agenda after we get finished with that.
May I ask them, I mean, and then may.
Please,
Okay.
right now. Which one?
This is Article 4,
Article
4.2-3.
4.2-3, seating members.
Will that be done in October if we are finished by that point?
That's already been done. This is, we still have to address it, but you are it.
Okay. and
You've been
I'm
seated.
Looking at terms, we have been seated.
You've been done.
Right.
We don't have limits, time limits.
The terms are required by statute to be staggered, so that all of you don't expire at the same time. And so it says in there, 2 members are appointed for a 3-year term, 2 appointed for a 2-year term, and then 1 for a 1-year term. Now, let's suppose that one member that was the, I don't wanna call it the short straw or anything like that, but just, they have to pick it some way. You do it alphabetically, do it any way. When they are up at the end of that year, then they are reappointed for a full 3-year term. So everybody ends up with a 3-year term once you get past that sort of jump start. Does that make sense? So the best way to do terms and seats for the planning boards, this is an excellent question, Ms. Fox, is to not go by the name, but give seat numbers. Like, the chair is not seat number 1. Seat number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just seat number 1 through 5. Doesn't matter which chair it is, it's just on the list. Then you plug a name in for who's in seat number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Seat numbers 1 and 2 would be the 3-year term. Seat numbers 4 and 5 would be 2-year. Seat number 5 would be that 1-year term. Then when they're reappointed, it would be for 3 years. Because you may have somebody that moves. So you need to reappoint someone to fulfill seat number 2 or whatever. And how long do we have? We have 2 more years or 1 more year or 6 more months. So you can keep track of expirations. Otherwise you start thinking in terms of, well, they were appointed on this day, so, you know, their term expires on an odd day.
They
So
would fill out the term and then it would start.
that's right, then it would be a full term. So the term is a 3-year thing that starts. And see, y'all started in December
Yes.
was when the appointments were made, or November when the appointments were formalized by the council, so that's when all of them would expire. So if they, under normal circumstances, nobody resigns, nobody moves away or has a health issue or anything like that, then every year in November, there might be an appointment or two to re-up by the council, by the Board of Aldermen. Okay, seats number 2 and 3 on the planning board need to be either reappointed or new members appointed, or whatever the case might be, or we need to appoint somebody, might be in June, to fill out Ms. Fox or Ms. Davis or somebody's seat. Make sense? So it becomes, it's just kind of keeping track. So our annual meeting for this body will be every January. So the planning board, in that rules of procedure, and the planning board, every January, our agenda will have nomination of the chair and the vice chair, that kind of thing for the planning board, where they pick their chair for the next year or vice chair for the next year. For the governing board, maybe it's every November or December or whatever the right month is, they will have, because that's around election time, so you may be seating new council members, new aldermen, right? And that would be the same meeting upon which you might say, well, we've also got terms expiring on the planning board, we need to either reappoint or replace, or whatever the case might be. You might have somebody that says, I don't want to be reappointed, I fulfilled mine. And I did not put a limit in here on how many terms you can serve. The board, the rules of procedure, you can look in there, and I can't remember if I put one in there or not, as to how many terms you might have or not. I didn't want to, you don't want to put the rules of procedure in the law. This is the law. The rules of procedure are much easier to amend. If you want to make the chair a 2-year term, that's just a change in the rules of procedure. We don't need to advertise stuff in the newspaper and everything else, because it's not that big a deal to the general public as to how long a planning board member serves as chair or vice chair. That makes sense? Or whether you conduct your election each year on the January meeting or some other month meeting. But the ordinance does have to go through a very elaborate newspaper notices, recommendation from the planning board, all that stuff, and then a formal hearing by the governing board, and then a vote by the governing board, and then we amend the ordinance and literally change the page, replace the documents, update the website, do all that stuff. Tracking, lots of tracking. So I don't like putting anything in the law that I don't have to put in the law. I'd rather have it over here, one of these easy peasy places. Y'all might decide to change the order of your agenda. So we change the rules of procedure, so that's the order of the agenda. You might want to put the pledge of allegiance at the end or whatever, I don't know. Okay? On?
So when do we decide what our terms are? Like,
You don't. The council, the board of aldermen that appointed you decides that.
oh,
Should they be doing that now or in October? That was kind of my, since we're learning
That, we'll bring it to them.
for next meeting.
Yeah.
Which ones are for 3, 2, and 1? Yeah. And that's a requirement of statute. That's not something we can change. We can't change it to 5. We can't change it to 1.
no, I said I want to be number 5.
Oh, you want to be number 5?
Yeah, I'll take the short straw.
Well,
I'm good.
Well, so you're gonna do all the work and then you're gonna
Yeah,
slide
it's a
on?
lot of work.
I can read between the tea leaves over here. Well, thank you for doing all the hard work here because this year is gonna be the most heavy lifting that the board will probably ever do, planning board will probably ever do. Then we shift over to the more fun stuff and stay over there as much as possible.
I'll give us all the fun, huh?
Are you leaving?
Very high odds, yes.
Spaceship coming in.
Yes,
on.
beat me up, Scotty.
Heading out. Thank you for your service in advance for the next year. We're glad to have you for a year.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. You know who your seat number 5 is. Who's filling seat number 5. But that's what I would do, Madam Clerk, is I would have a chart. And that way you can just track it by it might be a spreadsheet or something, so you can roll off. But you wanna kinda keep a record of past membership issues, at least to a point back in time. You know, it's not necessary that you keep all the member records, like for 70 years or anything like that. Any questions you ever have, Mackenzie, just ask. If I can't answer it, I will find the right person to get you the right answer. Because Bill probably doesn't know.
No. Never done it before.
Just kidding. Okay, what's the other question, Ms. Fox?
This is under the Board of Adjustment, which you say.
Still in Article 4?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
sorry, 4.3, 2B,
4.32B.
alternates. I don't know if you need to do alternates. This is the Board of Adjustment, which you
Right.
said in all actuality, we might be the Board of Adjustment. But,
You've
Seeing as-
uncovered a hint.
sorry,
You've uncovered a little secret to the sauce.
okay,
Remember when we had 7 in the
Yes.
text? My secret recipe for planning board in small towns where it can be a challenge to get 2 full boards worth of people, not to mention the council. You know, that's a lot of people to volunteer their time. So a lot of, and really your board of adjustment shouldn't have to really do anything, but they just have to be there if they're needed.
right.
So they don't meet every month and they don't have a lot going on every month. So I always recommend that you appoint the same members between the planning board and the board of adjustment. And the ideal mix is to have 7-member planning board, so you have 2 alternates which are not part-timers. They're equally as important, and I'll explain that in just a moment. In fact, I'll explain it right now. The answer appears in Article 5, and so I want to point you to it. In Article 5, in Article 6, variances, in Article 6, variances. Let me find the specific provision here that I'm looking for. Look at the bottom of page 2 of Article 6. This is under action by the Board of Adjustment. You go all the way down to E3, the very bottom of the page. One of the actions they can take is to grant the request upon the concurring vote of 4/5 of the members of the Board of Adjustment. That is state law. So, the ideal mix for the Board of Adjustment is 5 members, not 7. Okay? Because what is 4/5 represent? It's 80%. What is 4/5 of 6? What is 80, how do you get 4/5 of 6 members? It ends up being 83%. 4/5 of 7 members ends up like 87%. You can't get to 80% again until you hit 10 members. If you have a standard in here that says that number of Board of Adjustment members is, say, 6 or 7, then you are requiring a higher percentage affirmative vote to issue that variance than state law requires, and you're invalid. You will get thrown out of court instantly if anybody even thinks about a challenge. Okay, so you can't play with the numbers. The state put that in there. So the 2 alternates are critically important, because suppose you only had 5 members and no alternates. And one of the members said, well, that's my sister and her husband or partner or whatever who are doing that. Then guess what? They can't participate. They have a conflict of interest. So now you've got 4 members. What's 4/5 of 4? It's all 4. So that party is being deprived of the ability of having one dissenting vote. You follow me? So it's critically important at the Board of Adjustment level, when you are doing a hearing, that you actually have 5 seated members with no conflict of interest. So what happens when 7 people show up? When 7 people show up, and we can do it any way we want to, we can select based on rotation or whatever, which 5 are the seated members, and which 2 are gonna be the alternates. Do the alternates get to go home and watch football? No. They have to be here for every second of the hearing. And here's why. Let's say you finish all that hearing stuff, and you decide that you want to go look at something. So you recess your meeting and you're gonna reconvene next week, after everybody's had a chance to go by and look at the problem. So you're gonna meet next Thursday night, okay? And sometime between now and next Thursday, you get hungry, and you go get something to eat. And you bump into who at the restaurant or the grocery store? One of the parties. And maybe it's Bill over here is the person making the request on the variance, or the person who's concerned about the variance, and they say to you, hey, I really hope you're gonna vote my way. See ya, and that's it. Then when you reconvene, one of the first things that the chair has to do under Board of Adjustment is call the meeting back to order, reconvene. And first thing is to say, has anyone had any,
Conversations.
yeah, the technical term is ex parte communication. And you better say, I bumped into them at the grocery store, they said something about wanting my support, and so I'd like to recuse myself. So you get up, let's say it's Ms. Fox, so you get up, you come over and you sit down, and one of the alternates goes and takes a seat. They've heard everything, they've seen the sign, they participated just like you there, but now you've got your 5 for the actual vote. Okay? The imperfection in there is which one do you pick? Do you pick the one that you kind of think supports it or doesn't support it? You can't really do that, because you have to base your decision on facts, not feelings. So the Board of Adjustment is these are called quasi-judicial hearings that the Board of Adjustment does. That's that other group. Quasi-judicial means like a court. So you're acting like a court, like a panel of judges. You're weighing the evidence and making that decision. And so we limit those roles to variances, appeals, and there's a third category that will come up later in Article 7 when we get to it, called the special use permit, where there may be evidence that has to be submitted for a nuclear power plant to be built here, or pick something. Pick something scary, because that's what I do with the special use permits, are the scary stuff. Okay? You can't just say no to everything, because the statutes don't allow that. You can set up some pretty stiff standards, and then you can make it very challenging for them to achieve that. But you have to have a doorway for them to pass through. I'll give you an example. It's gonna shock you all. It's gonna shock you all. Turn to the beginning of Article 3. This is a long definition. I'm gonna show you one of the longest definitions in here, but you can thank your legislature for this.
That's what you're saying.
This is not because I want you to have this. This is because the statute requires every jurisdiction to allow some way, fashion, or another adult establishments. So turn the page to the top of page 2, and you'll see that it goes almost all the way down page 2, dealing with adult bookstore, adult cabaret, adult motel, adult motion picture theater, all kinds of stuff. So what's the best way to manage that in your town is to have a robust policy. Now that's just the definition part. That's not the standards. The standards, you'll see all that coming at you when we get to Article 10. So we make it a challenge. What do you have to have? You have to have a special use permit. That's quasi-judicial, which means every stinking thing that has to do with the standards for it are not just something they say they'll do. No, they're facts in writing, submitted as evidence, and if they violate one of those for a second, it's over. You follow me? So we can make it tough. Or if y'all are all about it, you can make it super easy. That's up to you, but typically towns make these things very tough. So here's what tough will look like. Remember, I'm gonna give you the ragu. You might look at something in there and say, well, we don't really want these ingredients. But you're gonna have the ragu, so you can deal with those problems. Otherwise, everybody gets upset. This food truck thing that I was telling you about, they just adopted their ordinance in the past 7 or 8 months. It was back in June, I believe. And so so fortunately, they have some standards. They didn't under their old ordinances at all, and that's what created the problem that everybody's griping about. They're there every day. Can we do something? Well, if you don't have any standards, the answer is no. Council can't just say, send somebody out there and tell them to move on along. That's not, I mean, they might do it because they're intimidated. But they might then go home and be all upset and end up talking to a buddy who says, hey, I know an attorney. And then the next thing you know, and see, and this is something I want to reiterate over and over and over again as to why I try to bulletproof your policies. If the town messes up like that, goes down there and just tries to wield some power they don't have that way, not legitimately, and they get challenged and they lose, it's no longer that you ask the judge or the other side asks the judge for a court cost. No longer. Now it's town pays all costs, both sides. So it's an expensive proposition to throw your weight around and act like a big shot without the authority to do that. So what's the best defense? Get it all down and then just follow these, and you got, and it doesn't matter who's mean and big and tall and everything, you're gonna prevail at the end of the day, and you're not gonna have to pay for their stuff because you are gonna win. If you lose, you're gonna pay for everything. So that's my approach. That's my approach. When the new state law came out, I looked at it and I typed and I wrote and I looked at it and I typed and I wrote and I thought, wait a minute, this is just too complicated. I said, this is actually, let's just dumb this down. Let's just build the ragu and do it that way. And then put the map amendment in the path. That means there's not an administrative decision by staff. There's not an administrative decision by the planning board. At the end of the day, it's a legislative decision by the governing board, and that is how the governing board can just vote no. They have to justify, when you look back in that Article 5 about amendments, it'll talk about adopting a statement of consistency and a statement of reasonableness to make this map amendment. That's justification. That's where you found that it's consistent with our plans and it's justifiable and all that stuff. And you might recommend doing it, but they might have another reason because they're listening to the voter side of it. Your job is not to listen to the voter side. Your job is the technical, the visionary side, because it's not that you're against the voter. It's that you need all that information in their hands to be able to do and make an informed decision. Planning is really just informed decision making. So when they get ready to make that decision and they vote yes, all the justification's there. But they don't have to vote yes. And guess what? If they vote no, they do not have to explain anything. They might just, it just doesn't feel good. You don't say, I vote no because. Best thing you can do is just vote no, and it's over. That's how you can control the things you want to control or need to control that threaten the stability of your community. You can't do it subjectively, like going down there and telling them they better get on out of here. That won't hold up if they come back with their little briefcase army. That won't hold up, that won't hold water at all. You might feel good doing it, but you won't win in the end. You want it where the briefcase army can open that briefcase as many times as they want to, and they can't get past
No.
the no.
No.
A legislative decision, you have to justify a change. You don't have to justify staying the same. I'm gonna give it to you as an example. Let's suppose that me and you are partners in a business, and we do whatever we do out there. We do wood pallets. And I decide that, I'm getting on up there in age, and I'd like to keep drawing big profit checks home and everything else. And you're saying, no, I think we need to modernize this equipment. And we're 50-50 partners. Who wins?
Existing.
I do. Staying the same breaks the tie. It takes a majority to change. If it's a tie or whatever, it just stays the same. Okay? So that's the kind of the way it is in lawmaking. It takes justification to change, okay? To be consistent with state law, we have to justify the change. But to stay the same, we don't. So when we set up all this stuff, that if you say, well, we're nervous about these things, then we put them into buckets where you gotta change to get to that bucket. Okay? Or you've gotta have some kind of highly sophisticated process to make it happen. Okay? So, adult establishments. Whatever you're scared of, whatever you say, well, we're a little bit nervous about, I don't know, people farm, I don't know what you're scared of. You know, but there's gonna be stuff people get scared of. They'll say things like, well, we don't want an asphalt plant. I don't know. You're gonna have these things that you're nervous about, and that's how we can protect it. We can't say it's impossible, but we can definitely make it something that they have to work to achieve so that they don't mess up the water quality or whatever you're concerned with. Don't create the odor, don't create the whatever traffic or the noise or the truck or the tearing up the roads or whatever the issues are. Otherwise, it's a free pass. You can't be subjective and just say yes and no. I like it. See, I could write a one-page order that says if I like it, good. If I don't like it, no. But that doesn't fly under the state statutes in this state. So if you want to have any ability in this town to control any inundation by things that you're nervous about, and I can tell you there's a town out there right now that's having a lot of challenge over the sudden interest in lithium inside the town limits, right beside neighborhoods and everything else. And they're like, how do we deal with this? Well, they can't really deal with it after the fact. Because once they've established that property right to go mine that lithium, you can't go take it away from them. What you can do is you can prevent it from happening to begin with. Or you can condition how it happens. Well, do you go in and do you know, subsurface or do you do open pit? Might be more than one way to skin the poor cats, but proverbial cat. You know what I mean? That's what the standards are really about, is how do we prepare ourselves for things that we're concerned about ahead of time, not after the fact. We want to facilitate positive new development, or whatever it is the town wants. What do you like? What do you want? You want to facilitate that. This is not about saying no to everybody by any means. This is about having standards in place for the things that do concern you. Okay? You can make the pathway as easy as you want for things that you would like more of. Because most towns want one of two things. They either want to preserve and protect what they have, or they want to change something. Most towns have some combination of the two. They might tell you they are all about preserving and protecting because there's something about it. And there might be other things that they would like to see change. If you want to preserve and protect or change in the direction that you want to go in, you need something that's going to facilitate that, because most of the bigger players out there are not going to do anything if they can't get the entitlements. That is the written, documented, legal authorizations, not calling Bill and saying, can I park my food truck in the town hall parking lot? And he says, well, I don't have anything that says you can't. So I jump out there at it. Well, that might be for food truck, but it's not going to be for anybody that's putting real money into something. A lot of people used to say that think that businesses would be against this sort of thing. Actually, serious businesses are all for it. They won't put money down. Tractor Supply, perfect example. I've used this example for a long time, but it's a true story. Town of Midland, a fairly new corporation in the state. I think they incorporated in 2000, but by 2010 was starting to get some pressures. And so the county had left this big old strip of commercial zoning, it was 8 miles long along Highway 2427. Thinking, oh, that's not restricted, that'll let commercial happen all along that whole stretch. Nothing was happening. And we went through all of this. And right after it was adopted, we get a call from Tractor Supply saying, just wanted to make sure that everything got adopted because we were watching, we couldn't figure out where to go. Because that 8-mile strip didn't offer a hot spot. Where's the center of action gonna be? Where's the best location to be? That's what they wanted. They wanted to know where that's gonna be. So we had peeled a lot of that up, created 2 nice big, about 5 mile apart centers, like one sort of the middle of town and one sort of like this other part of town, like a secondary town, part of the town. And they were submitting plans and going through all that, and getting their approvals and building that building as fast as they could go. And did a nice job, you know, with everything because they met the standards and they couldn't wait. But they weren't about to go till they had clarity. Because they are, you know, those Tractor Supply buildings, and this is the way the real world works, if there's any kind of institutional or investor level money at all involved in it. The 1031 exchange in the IRS tax code has become a major tool. Anybody remember when Walgreens and CVS looked, it was like we were in a cloud and it was raining down all over the state. Everywhere you went, there was a new Walgreens, and across the corner was a new CVS, and they were all happening at one time. We got hundreds of them in just a very short period of time in North Carolina. Did Walgreens or CVS pay for those buildings? Heck no. They were almost all 1031 exchanges. Now what that means is that me and my wife, Sharon, we own a giant farm, 5,000 acres in Nebraska, and we've been doing corn since my great-grandparents were around. And she fell off of a train coming down from Detroit. And that's how we met. And she's been living on the farm, and kids do want anything to do with farming. I think she's been the big influence on that. She's a city girl. So we're gonna sell the farm. But we wanna set the kids up with some kind of, we're not gonna hand them all this money at one time. We're gonna set the kids up to have a steady income and things like that. And so the financial people tell me, well, let's do a 1031 exchange, which means you don't touch the money that comes in from the sale. That money is gonna go, you're gonna sign over the deed to the farm, and this group on Wall Street is going to fund that, and the money's gonna go over here and buy you undivided interest in 32 Walgreens store properties. And one of them's gonna be called Walgreens 1-ABCDE-Newland NC LLC. It's a company set up for one store that's gonna be built by the two brothers, the father-son duo out of New Orleans that does them all in North Carolina. And then as soon as Walgreens has paid rent for 3 months, it becomes a performing asset, and it's gonna be flipped on the market, and that, me and my wife are gonna buy all these, and we're gonna have all this interest in all these different Walgreens stores all over. We've never been to these places, we don't know anything about them. But Walgreens is sitting there in Newland, doing its little thing. Who owns it? Some LLC. Who owns the LLC? Well, Rick and Sharon have got a good bit of this one, 71.236% undivided interest. Our kids gonna get these checks for 20 years. And we're all gonna own a bunch of buildings that get turned into dollar stores. Because the Walgreens store is the ideal format for a new modern general store. But that's how real development works now. It's not Rick's gonna go build and open up a store and call it Walgreens. That's not the norm as much as. We're all for small business, but most of the economic activity that takes place going forward is usually backed by more institutional or organized sources. So was that I know that was a little bit of a story, but I wanted to give you a little perspective on why we have to build these things the way we build them. Because you're gonna have an interest in this town. What do you have any issues facing the town now?
I think one of our biggest ones is the grocery store. I mean, we have one, so we're captive. And there's.
So your price is a problem.
Yeah, so the big interest has been getting a second one to get competition in here, plus the location, it's outside, it's the edge of town. You know, and most of the residences are up over here.
And how do we track that? How do we incentivize it? That's good.
I found out that Ingalls owns the land beside their grocery store, and they want to build a new Ingalls. I don't know what's holding them back, other than it's not really the best time to be building something right now.
They don't
But-
have to, they don't have to right now.
Right, but that's their
Until they
plan,
get competition.
because I told them people were disgruntled with them.
I've tried to use some of these questions, and thank you, Ms. Fox, for those questions, as opportunities to do a little bit of teaching, if you can call it that. Because this is an arena some of you may be very comfortable in, it may be an arena that's somewhat new to you, but my job is to help level that playing field so that those that wanna know more, can get more. Those that already know, I'm sorry, if I ever tell you something you already are an expert in, because some of you are gonna be experts in all different kinds of walks of life and what have you, but I like to tie it all down to basically the art of building your town, or preserving or protecting your town, whatever that is, and that's gonna come out in this other part. So with that said, that's all I have under item number 1, Madam Chair, the NDO. I do have an update for you under item number 2, if you'd like for me to proceed.
That'd be good.
All right. Tom, instead of having Tom come up here and spend 5 minutes, I got Tom to give me the update, and I'm gonna provide you with the update. I just got this from him. He has prepared, there's 3 big things that he's involved in right now. One is the survey, and that's getting input and information from the citizens. He has prepared an online community input survey and will provide a website link or QR code to the town administrator, that guy back there, requesting staff to post the link to provide an opportunity for community input. The online survey will be one of a few methods used to solicit community input. So that's gonna be one way to try to really push it out there. We're also gonna be doing some face-to-face stuff in the business community area around on the street here, okay? He's also working on the narrative, which is mostly those early background articles, not articles in this ordinance, but I should say chapters in the plan. Because that plan is what you use if you're pursuing funding. It might be money to go out and subsidize maybe a water line extension or whatever the case might be, to try to land that new grocery store or whatever you're trying to accomplish. The state's not gonna throw you some money unless it comes through a special act. But if it's gonna come through any kind of program, like we didn't just get some money, we need to go down to the infrastructure bank in Raleigh and apply for some or request some. They're gonna wanna know, okay, is this working in a direction? Are you going somewhere with this, or is this just to help out somebody? So now that the Census Bureau recently released the 2018 to 2022 American Community Survey, In Focus will complete a draft of chapters 1 through 3. Not of this, but of the plan. There will be a total of 9 chapters. The first 3 chapters summarize Newland's community profile. That's really about Newland, okay? Not where you're going, but where you
Where we are
are.
now.
Right, because when somebody's checking you out, that grocery store, they are looking at information. They're not gonna pick up the phone and call town hall anymore. They do it online. There's no way around that, so we have to play in that arena. Once these chapters are completed, In Focus will provide to the town administrator to ask for review and clarification of any missing information. So he'll be sending it to Bill to double check what he's finding, to to make sure we've got it right before it then comes to you in draft form. We don't wanna send it to you with some stuff in it. Now, you may still find some things about the history or something like that that you feel would be important to add, because he'll have a history section in there based on what he finds. So but you're gonna have that local knowledge that can say, hey, we'd like you to add this and this and this and that, and I'll send you something, whatever you need, we'll get it in there. And clarification of any missing information. And then on the topic of maps, In Focus has completed a draft map of existing land use, which is what is out there. This is a map, this is basically a study map, so we can really figure out the fabric of the town, the character of the town as a whole, and in areas, so that we can figure out things like carrying capacity. You know, without understanding these dynamics, it's very difficult for utility people to look at water line sizes, sewer people to look at pipeline sizes or gravity versus pump station issues, and property ownership issues, and all those things that inform somebody like a grocery store, or it might even give us some better insight on the location economics and location dynamics of where we want to try to encourage them to go. We want to try to encourage them in this area. Like you said a minute ago, you made a comment, Bill, that the one's a bit too far out of town.
Yeah.
You know, that's because there was not any real, probably, effort put into enticing them into a location that's better for the citizens of the town. It might have just been cheaper for the grocery store, or it might have just been something that was available at the time without much additional thought. So, you know, that map will help us with our vision map, which is that future land use, sort of which way are we gonna, do we wanna encourage or discourage growth and that kind of thing. That helps the governing board make decisions about when to approve or pursue funding on maybe water line expansions or extensions or whatever the case might be. You see, it all starts to weave together very well. It's not about good old boys and good old girls and who owns what, and I'm gonna do this, yeah, y'all have been real good to the town, you know. These folks donated property for the park, and we, you know, anything we do to help them is great, but now Rick, you know, he's a scoundrel, he used to jump his bicycle through my mother-in-law's rose bush down there at the corner of the street instead of going around the end of where the sign is, and, never have gotten over that, ever since she fell out there trying to put that thing back up, you know. That's not how you do this. That might be the way you want to do it, but it's not how you actually do this. So, that's Tom's update. So, Madam Chair, members of the board, distinguished guests and leaders, that's everything I have for you at this meeting, and we will be back in a month. Review. So if you have any questions on what all we just put out, that'll be the time, then we'll introduce some more, and I promise that as we warm you up, we will start smoothing this thing out. Right now, I probably have too many little stories that I need to interject because I'm trying to add a little bit of perspective to what we're doing here, okay?
Well, thank you, Rick.
All right, thank you.
Have we got any new business? I would like to thank Jamie for her coming and Keenan for coming. I'd still like to see the other two come to one of these meetings. I guess if nothing else, I will adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
22. Motion.
You can do that either way you want to. The chair can convene and adjourn. If you want to continue, like take a recess, like say you wanted to come back together in a few days instead of waiting a whole month, then you would make a motion or have someone make a motion to recess or continue the meeting. So you go into a recess state, then
That keeps the minutes open for it, right?
that means it's still one meeting, but you're getting back together in a few days or a week or whatever, because maybe we had so much and or somebody had to leave and you wanted to just stop and pick back up, that sort of thing. But when it comes to adjourning, that's really a matter of the protocol that's determined by the board. Do you want to call for motions to adjourn, or do you
Let's
Or
call
is
for
the chair just
motion, 'cause
adjourned?
I think that's how most, maybe the board do that. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that way we all know we're adjourned.
that's true, I make a motion that our meeting adjourned.
Thank you. Second? Second. Very good. All in favor?
You say that was about 7:40 something?
It
It's
is
7:41.
All right.
37 seconds. All right, just a quick reminder, we're doing some construction at front, so just make sure you kind of watch your step.
Don't trip out the door.
Please don't.
Bill, here's your book.
Yep, thank you.
Did I? Yeah.
I took pictures of that section.
Okay, that's fine.